all the pages of the sermon up here instead of taking some with me. I'm not sure what happened. Typically, Cindy gets the reading where there's 1,001 names from the Old Testament. I don't know what happened. Simeon was pretty easy. Today is the first Sunday of the church year. Advent begins the church year for us, and we celebrate this Sunday hope. Next Sunday we celebrate peace. On the third Sunday, joy. And on the fourth Sunday, love. But this Sunday, we celebrate hope. I thought a lot about hope. Like, why hope? Why now? Why here? And yet it seemed to me that that was indeed what today's sermon needed to be about. Not only because of what happens in today's scripture, but also because I kept getting all these signs in my own life that it needed to be about hope. For example, this week, Mary and I watched a Hallmark movie. I know. Watch it and weep. But it was called Hope at Christmas. And good things happened, not only for romantic people, getting straightened out and finding the right person or whatever, but good things happened for a number of people. And lives changed because people had hope that something could be different. Then we went to what Mary told me would be a celebration of lights at the state fairgrounds. We ended up in Plant City at the Florida Fairgrounds, or what is it? Hillsborough Fairgrounds. I think it gave a defibrillator a workout because we bounced along roads that weren't paved for quite a while. And one of the people with us was a munchkin who said, I want to ride on the horse-drawn wagon, and did. And when the woman who was driving the wagon got everybody on board, she goes, let me introduce you to your horses. This is faith, and this is hope. Yesterday was the first time we decorated the church and I was unable to be here. And I had faith and hope that it would be beautifully decorated. And I want to thank those people who decorated it for us. This morning I had hoped that I'd be able to sleep till 6. We have 4 animals. 2 of them disagreed. That was enough for a quorum. So I guess my string of hope stopped at 3, but hopefully yours will go on. In today's reading, Simeon has lived to be an older man. And he has one hope. He's had one hope his whole life. And his hope was that in his life, before he died, he would find and see the Messiah, the promised one of God, the one who would come to be Emmanuel, God with us. And in today's reading, he does. You might find the reading a little strange. I did initially, because it actually happens after Christmas. But it's Hope Sunday. And it's about hope. So the more I thought about hope, I thought, where in our world are we to find hope today? And I thought, well, we need to look at what's happening around us and who around us has spoken to us. And I found a story about Nelson Mandela, who became the first African black president of South Africa after 27 years in prison. And while he was in prison, he was in a small, dank, nasty little cell. He worked in a limestone quarry, not by choice. And he was not allowed to wear dark glasses. And between the bright sun and the glare on the limestone, his eyes suffered the rest of his life from that experience. And yet from prison, he wrote letters. And his letters were often about hope. One of the letters he wrote said this in it: "Remember that hope is a powerful weapon even when all else is lost." Now, I'm presuming you all know the story of Nelson Mandela and the fact that he was imprisoned not because he was some horrendous drug lord or terrible criminal or serial killer. He was imprisoned because he protested against apartheid in South Africa. He was a political prisoner, and yet he writes about hope. In another letter, he describes saints of biblical times, and he says, "They visualize a new world where there will be no wars, where famine, disease, and racial intolerance will be no more. Precisely the world for which I am fighting." And one more letter he wrote from prison contained these sentences: "Our cause is just. It is a fight for human dignity and for an honorable life." So Mandela's hope, which I hope we inherit, is hope for a just nation and a just world, the new world of which the biblical saints also spoke. Then I thought, well, let's look a little more closely to home and into times in which we live. And I found a story on the internet, dated August 15th of this year. And it was about a story that took place in Grass Valley, California. It's a story of hope. In Grass Valley, California, almost everybody lost their homes to the wildfires this summer. And when the firefighters from that area were doing a sweep following the fire to see who they could find amidst the ruins, they came across a house, and in the doorway of the house were huddled a chicken and a cat. And they surmised that the chicken and the cat survived the wildfire because they huddled with each other. So the firefighters found water to try to rehydrate the two animals, and then they called the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. And when folks came to take the animals to the shelter to give them the care and the medical attention they needed, the cat and the chicken refused to go without being in the same cage together. They treated them for their burns. The cat was reunited with its family, and the chicken was relocated to another brood of chickens because the owner of the chickens, other chickens had been killed in the fire. But the people of the area said, because of the chicken and the cat, we have hope. We have hope. The last story I want to share with you, and I'm going to read most of it, so we'll see how that goes, is a story written by Rick Hamlin and posted online. And he talks about Christmas Eve in Los Angeles. And he says, 9 o'clock on Christmas Eve, we filed into the church. It could have been any church at any Christmas, except the program was printed in Spanish and English. And there was this curious row of kids, 8 of them, dressed in Japanese kimonos and holding fans. What are they dressed for? I whispered to our 20-something son, the performance. There would be a dance to Silent Night. The first Sunday I visited was February 19th, 2017, the 75th anniversary of President Roosevelt's Executive Order 9066. We all remember that. Mary's probably taught it to her kids. 9066, right, Mary? In those early days of World War II, President Roosevelt authorized the Secretary of War to incarcerate Japanese Americans in internment camps, which, in the case of this church, meant the entire congregation. During the sermon that Sunday in 2017, the rector, Mother Anna, gestured toward a copy of the actual presidential order framed under glass. Instructions to all persons of Japanese ancestry, it read. Afterward, I walked over to see it, and several other members of the congregation did as well. They recounted the war years. First in Santa Anita, then in the Arizona desert. They were young then. In the spring of 1942, the congregants were sent to camps in Arizona or Arkansas, along with their priests, who were a father and a son. Their last occasion to worship together in their beloved church was Easter Sunday. And Reverend Yamazaki said, "We shall have Easter." He reminded his congregation that if evacuation is the order of the day in our lives, we have examples in history recorded in the Bible. Joseph and Mary's flight into Egypt, for one. This is our Calvary, and we must be willing to say, "Abba, forgive them. They know not what they do." As Jesus had his resurrection from the dark tomb, so may it be with us. We shall have our Easter. In 1945, he and his flock came back to St. Mary's and rebuilt their lives. Before the war, Japanese Americans had been limited to a few professions, if you consider these professions: selling fruits and vegetables, fishing, growing flowers, and gardening. Each memorialized in the church in a stained glass window. After those restrictions were lifted, the people of St. Mary's prospered. There were many Japanese American families sitting in the pews that Christmas Eve. I noticed that one of the songs we would sing was a Japanese hymn. Then there were the children in kimonos, but those children were not all Japanese, nor was the congregation. The neighborhood had changed. This part that had been called Uptown was now dubbed Koreatown. And to make things more interesting, most of the residents around the church were Mexican Americans. When Mother Anna came to St. Mary's in 2011, she welcomed the Mexican immigrants and gave them a basketball court for the kids to use and helped them get into the Head Start program out there. The Japanese Americans who worshiped at St. Mary's must have thought of their church as a place of sanctuary. But they couldn't help remembering what it had been to come to a new country, navigate a new language, work hard, and establish themselves in a new place. They welcomed their Spanish-speaking sisters and brothers. And Mother Anna established a schedule where once a month the service was bilingual. We rose to sing "O Come All Ye Faithful" in Spanish and English simultaneously. How cool that must have been. We prayed in both languages, and Mother Anna gave the sermon going back and forth from Spanish to English and English to Spanish, paragraph by paragraph. She spoke of Joseph and Mary and their journey. She reminded us that Joseph was a carpenter, that these people who celebrated the first Christmas were working people, just like the congregation. Finally, the moment came for the children. They bowed, struck poses, and moved in different patterns, fans fluttering. They moved gracefully, reverently, and as they danced, they brought the familiar words, heavenly peace, to life. No, the world wasn't that calm, and things didn't always feel bright. But here was a place where people had known the disruptions and sorrows of war. For a time, they had been labeled the enemy. But they knew how to make peace, welcoming the strangers in their midst, the children of all coming together in dance. And so for the people of St. Mary's, hope was in the church that offered sanctuary, a church that became home when they were displaced. And hope was in the children, all their children. And so today when we ponder why hope, I think it's because it's the greatest gift that endures when it seems like nothing else is there. Generation after generation, for generation after generation. Hope. Why here? Because we have, I believe, the will and desire to create and build God's kingdom. No, it's not a misspelling. At Faith Family, where all are sisters and brothers, and every child is gifts. Where those of us who felt exiled from other church experiences could find sanctuary. And where from the very first day of the existence of this church, sanctuary was what we hoped to offer. Why now? Because today is the only day we have. The one we have to prepare for the coming of the Christ child and for all the children entrusted to us. And maybe it's because that we then, like Simeon, can say when it's time for us to part this life, I have seen the Lord. Amen.
It's not in your bulletins, but my friend next to me will be assisting me today on this song. Some of you may know him. I heard the bells on Christmas Day, there over million carols play, and wild and sweet the words repeat of peace on earth, goodwill to men. peace on earth, goodwill to men. The wrong shall fail, the right prevail.